Welcome to Bigfoot Odyssey Storytime. I've got 3 great stories for you today. The first comes from Miss Diane Fowler, a good friend and moderator for Bigfoot Odyssey. Hope you enjoy. When I was a little girl, my friend and I loved to play in the woods and down by the creek. We would play picnic, take peanut butter sandwiches, and just hang out. We would run with our bare feet in the creek. Several times when we were there, we heard noises. We would hear movement and rustling in the bushes. Sometimes we would hear what I know now were tree knocks. She had 2 brothers, and we thought they were messing with us, but when we got back to our house, they would be there. We asked if they were in the woods trying to scare us, and they would always deny it. They said they had better things to do than hang out with little girls. When I got home, I told my mother about this and how we were hearing noises when we were in the woods. She said I was no longer allowed to go down there unless I went with my older sister. I finally convinced my sister to go with us one afternoon to play at the creek. My sister, being older and a teenager, really didn't want to go, but she did. So with my friend Pam, we packed a picnic and headed to the woods. Not long after we were there, we started hearing the same noises. We continued to play in the creek, but my sister seemed to be uneasy. We heard, as I said, what I know now was a loud tree knock nearby. My sister told us to gather all of our things, and she was looking all around. She was looking up the hill from where we were sitting, then all of a sudden she told us to run. She said, "Run fast to the house, do not stop." We ran as fast as we could to the clearing and then to the house. When we got there, my sister started crying. My mother asked her what was going on. Pam and I were asking, what happened? She said she saw a large, hairy man. She was so shaken up that she told us and my mother to please lock the door. After a while, my mother got her to calm down. She called my friend's mother and asked her to come walk Pam home. She explained to her that Hilda, my sister, had seen something in the woods and was very scared and upset. We never went back to the woods to play again. My sister was affected by this for a long time. She talked to my father about it and really never wanted to discuss it to anyone. She would say, "I know what I saw, and no one will believe me." This is what got me interested in Bigfoot. It was the most scared I'd ever been. Just knowing the fear and urgency to get out of there that my sister was having scared me to death. Now that time has passed and she knows my interest in Bigfoot and that I have all the Bigfoot paraphernalia and t-shirts and that I also like to follow researchers, she will talk about it with me. She has a sort of pride you can see in her expressions that she truly has seen one, but she will only talk to believers. Great story, Miss Diane. I and many others understand the potential trauma involved in seeing one of these creatures. As I've said, I don't believe we're emotionally equipped to handle seeing a supposedly mythical monster in the flesh. This next account is one given by Bob Titmus, a well-known Bigfoot researcher, and is told as it was written by Larry Batson. In the last years of Bob Titmus's life, I occasionally talked to him on the phone when he was up to it. One day, he told me about being up in Bluff Creek area, tracking Bigfoot, collecting hair samples, looking for footprints or whatever he could find. He related this incident, which occurred about a year or 2 before the Patterson-Gimlin footage had been filmed. Titmus was sure his memory was failing him, but this event he remembers perfectly. He was deep in the backcountry of Bluff Creek by himself one afternoon. At the time, he was certain there was a Sasquatch or Sasquatches very close by the evidence he was finding. He was so involved and so focused that he lost track of time, and the sun was starting to go down. The density of the forest overcame him. He suddenly realized the day was getting too dark to find his way back to his main campsite. Titmus realized that he was going to have to stay put until morning because trying to find his way out in the darkness was dangerous and foolish. The nights can be quite cold, and he really was not wearing enough clothing just to lie in the woods and try to sleep. So he began to dig a pit for him to sleep in. After he finished digging his bed, he laid in it and started covering himself with a thick layer of leaves, branches, and pine needles. After he finished, the only part of him that was exposed was a small area around his face. He was quite comfortable, sufficiently warm enough, and had no problem going to sleep. Titmus guessed the time was probably about 1 a.m. when he was startled awake by a sound of something moving through the forest nearby, and it seemed from the sound to be heading in his direction. He could hear the sound of heavy footsteps crashing methodically through the forest brush, breaking limbs and so forth. At first, he thought it was a bear, but it wasn't long before he realized it was too noisy for a bear. It came closer and closer, then it stopped. He could hear the thing breathing, not just breathing, but also sniffing the air like it was trying to pick up a scent, and now he realized that it had indeed picked up his scent, but could not figure out where he was. With just his face exposed, he was very well concealed from what he came to understand had to be a Sasquatch. All of a sudden, it started screaming, breaking branches and throwing rocks in his direction. Titmus held very still and very quiet. The Sasquatch started moving around, pacing back and forth through the forest, continuing to scream, bellow, and throw debris. He related that his behavior continued until about an hour before daybreak. Then, as the sun began to rise and light trickled through the forest canopy, the creature went away and the forest fell silent again. He pulled himself out of his makeshift bed in the ground and started to look around, investigating the entire area. He walked in the direction of where the ruckus had come from, and he could not believe his eyes. It was like a bulldozer had gone through the forest. Saplings had been pulled out of the ground, larger trees pushed over, broken or snapped in two. There were branches covered with hair samples, and the ground was littered with footprints. It was no bear. In later years, Titmus went back to Bluff Creek shortly after the Patterson footage had been filmed in October of 1967. He saw the footprints on the sandbar the film subject had left, and he was certain that this was the same Sasquatch that he encountered the night he slept in the pit in the wilds of Bluff Creek. Of course, there is no real way to confirm that what he experienced was Patty, but Titmus was a key figure in Sasquatch and Bigfoot research for nearly 40 years. He died in Chilliwack, British Columbia, July 1st, 1997, following a heart attack suffered a few days before at his home in Harrison Hot Springs, British Columbia. He was 78. This last short story comes from a man who had an experience back in 1970, Mountain Ranch, Calaveras County, California. I was recently involved in a too close encounter with a cougar, and as I later discussed my experience with a park ranger, he shared an encounter in Mount St. Helens that I knew before he finished his tale was that of one with a Bigfoot. I knew because I'd had my own encounter many years ago. My parents owned a small resort located in Mount Ranch, Calaveras County, California. One night in the late spring of 1970, I was sitting just inside the tree line on the edge of a small golf course, enjoying a full moon and the quiet of the night. I still like to just go outside at night and sit, with no agenda beyond just pure pleasure in the stillness. As I sat there, the frogs in full chorus from the nearby lakes, I noticed the sound of something large moving through the trees and brush adjoining the golf course, getting quickly louder and closer. I was located a long distance from any building, and with no time to get to relative safety, I chose to remain very quietly sitting where I was just to watch, hoping whatever it was wouldn't see me. The breaking branches and crush of forest underfoot grew louder and louder until I finally could see, by the light of the full moon, movement of branches about 30 feet from my location. And then a huge, fur-covered biped emerged from the thicker growth and moved into the adjoining clearing, striding fast. My heart was pounding hard, and I hardly dared to breathe, but I remained perfectly still and prayed it would just keep moving. And it did, for a few more steps, and then it stopped and turned and looked straight at me. We stared at one another for a few moments, and then it let out a guttural grunt and moved forward into the trees once again. I just sat there, my mind trying hard to deny the whole thing that had just happened. But happen it most definitely did, and the experience changed me forever. Now, I'm not one to simply chalk someone's strange story up to an overactive imagination. I don't really know what it is that affects us so much when these creatures come into our lives. What I do know is that the best of us can get lost in trying to find out. Thanks for joining me here for Storytime. If you enjoyed, hit that thumbs up and share. Thanks again for listening.